Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. As you can tell from the title of the video, I wanted to focus on a particular kind of film stock from Ilford that, to be honest, I don't think gets a lot of attention. You don't really see too many reviews, not a lot of vloggers or photographers that are really sharing a lot of reviews about it, but it was a film stock that I actually stumbled upon completely by accident. And it was one of those expired rolls. It's been sitting in the basement for years, just kind of gathering dust in a cabinet. And so I figured, what the hell, why not? Let's give it a go. I ended up shooting a single roll of Ilford SFX. Oh God, that's a mouthful. A roll of Ilford SFX 200. So it's a relatively low speed film, black and white. It's a little bit different than HP5 or even XP4, which XP4 is a C41 processed black and white film, so it's a little more traditional in the sense that you can pretty much take it to most photo labs and they'll still process it in-house without having to either outsource it or take a more traditional black and white dunking approach with developing the film. But SFX is actually pretty unique, and actually had to do a little digging myself on this because I've never shot with infrared film before. And I know in the technical sense, this specific kind of Ilford film stock isn't really a true infrared film, only because with true infrared films, you actually can't handle it with, it's hypersensitive to not only light, but it's hypersensitive to any form of heat. So hence the name infrared. So what ends up happening when you photograph with an infrared film is you get these very dramatic effects in your photographs. In a sense, think of your warmest temperatures being emphasized with very black tones, and I'll include a few visual examples in the video as well so you guys know what I'm getting on about. And it's really kind of provides that extra boost of contrast to your black and white prints versus a more commonly used black and white film stock such as Kodak Tri-X, or what's another good one? Or either Kodak T-Max, which I don't believe is in production anymore, but you still can find it occasionally on Amazon and eBay. But yeah, so I don't really have like a true format to this particular video. This is gonna be this is gonna be me just kind of talking about my experience with shooting the film, some of the photos that I was able to get out of shooting this particular film stock, which, full disclosure, the roll that I did use to take these pictures was expired. Exactly how expired it was, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but given that it was sitting in the basement for a number of years, it was pretty expired. Let's just put it that way. So some of the shots I took turned out better than others, and from what I've read, this type of film, especially, the fact that it's a low ISO film rated at 200, but also the fact that it is an infrared film, is best suited for very brightly lit environments, so shooting on a very bright sunny day, whereas I would say about maybe a quarter or a third of the photos that I put through on this roll of film were definitely shot on more overcast, kind of cloudy days. So as a result, some of the photos did generate a lot of grain, even for such a low speed film. And I have read online that this is a fairly common thing with SFX. So keep in mind, some of the photos some photos turned out better than others. So we're just gonna keep a very open mind, and yeah, this will be a fun journey, and let's get right into it. All of the photographs that we're about to walk through were photographed using this camera. So this little guy right here, this is the Minolta AL rangefinder. So this is a standard 35mm rangefinder. This actually belonged to my great-grandfather many years ago. So I know this camera dates back to at least the 1960s. I have to look up the exact manufacturing date, but I believe it came out in the mid to late 1960s. So pretty vintage camera. I put a couple of rolls through this camera, and the lens is surprisingly sharp. I will say I've had overall a very good experience shooting with this camera. Anyway, I will stop rambling. Let's get into it. All right, so as I mentioned earlier, the film stock that I photographed these scans with that we're going to walk through in just a minute here, the Ilford SFX 200. It is a medium speed black and white film, and what's particularly unique about this film stock is its extended red sensitivity. So for any type of very brightly lit outdoor situations, if you're photographing landscapes, for example, any area where a lot of heat is being thrown off, that's where you're going to get these almost completely black types of tones. So if you notice in this example photograph, obviously this is not mine, I'm on Ilford's website right now, the sky in this picture is almost black, and this is the direct cause of so based on this photograph, it's very, very obvious that it's a very clear sunny day out, and given the amount of heat that the sunlight is giving off in this photograph in particular, and that the sky is emitting, that's how you're getting these almost sort of black tones within the photograph. That, in addition to any sort of red filter, is only going to enhance and dramatize that effect even more so. So this is quite a contrast from more traditional black and white film stocks that you typically see a lot more coverage, a lot more reviews and blogs about, such as Kodak T-Max, Kodak Tri-X, and even Ilford HP5, which I will cover that in a future video, so stay tuned for that. But yeah, other than that, these are some other sample photographs. I'm pulling these from the Lomography website right now. Again, as you can tell, a lot of very high contrasty photos. I'm sure a lot of these photographers leverage some sort of red filter or some sort of lens filter to really enhance that overall effect as well. But just in general, infrared film stocks, compared to your more traditional standard panchromatic films such as Kodak Tri-X, tends to give off that more dramatic contrasty effect in comparison to other Kodak film stocks, which are a little bit less contrasty and a little bit more neutral in the way that they portray highlights and shadows. So with that, let's just dive right into the good stuff here. So let's put this up in a full screen. So to give some background into kind of the timeline and when a lot of these photos were captured, as I mentioned earlier, I used a Minolta AL rangefinder. Love the camera. It's been passed down to me from my father. It was my great-grandfather's many, many years ago. And I have put a few rolls of film through the camera, and most of which has been either Kodak Portra 160 or Kodak Portra 400. I have put Kodak Ultramax through the camera as well. And overall, in brightly lit conditions, the lens is very sharp. It takes some really nice photos, and honestly, the camera has performed really well under a variety of lighting conditions. So to kick things off, this photograph, I used to live in Chicago. I lived in a very small pocket on the north side of the city with an uptown called Buena Park. And this just so happens to be at the park right around the corner from my old apartment. You can see the L train tracks right back here. There's actually a little dog park back there as well. And this photograph was taken, oh gosh, this was like in the very early stages of the COVID pandemic. So this was right around, I would say, May, maybe early June of 2020. So at this point, a lot of the streets were very quiet. A lot of the parks were still closed. There wasn't really a whole lot of activity going on. So I figured, what the hell? Let's go out. Let's take some photographs. I've been quarantined long enough, not really interacting with any people while doing this. So I figured I would just go around the neighborhood, snap some pictures, and see what I could get. This picture in particular, a little bit underexposed, I will say. I do remember the weather conditions the day that I took a handful of these photographs. It was definitely overcast. It was a little bit rainy as well, so probably not the most ideal lighting conditions for taking some of these photos, and especially because this is a lower rated film stock as well. The shutter speed was a little bit slower than what I probably would have liked for this style of street photography, but all in all, you know, I really just kind of wanted to have some fun, experiment a little bit, capture kind of the essence of, you know, what the neighborhood was like during the earliest stages of the COVID pandemic. So pretty simple photograph of a playground. Not the best photo, like I said, definitely underexposed. But all in all, you know, it was one of the very first frames that I ever snapped on the roll of SFX 200. So yeah, all in all, an interesting photograph, but nothing too crazy. All right, this photograph here. So this is taken on Alta Vista, and this is a particular street. It's actually just south of where I used to live, but it's also just north of Wrigley Field. And this row is particularly unique, mainly, and I could be butchering this, but the way that this street was designed, most of these houses date back to the early 1900s, and the houses were actually modeled after a lot of the row houses in London. And so architecturally speaking, the houses are matched up diagonally. So for example, the row house that was built on the southwest corner of the block matches the house that was built on the far northeast corner of the street, and it's pretty much all in inverse going down north-south. So it's a pretty unique neighborhood, lined with a lot of trees. It's very picturesque. A lot of people go walking and running through the neighborhood all the time. It is a public street. It's a residential neighborhood. And so I, you know, while walking around the neighborhood, I took my camera with me, snapped a few pictures. This was one of the better exposures I got, I will say. And this was not taken on the same day as this photograph. I do remember that for sure. So this was definitely a much warmer, much sunnier day, and as you could tell, you know, there's definitely a lot more detail recovered in some of the shadows in comparison to, you know, this photograph, especially where, you know, you zoom in on the scan, albeit it's kind of a shitty scan, but there's a lot more detail that's lost in this photograph in comparison to what we're seeing in this frame here. So a couple of things to note. Given that this was a very sunny day, you do notice that there are a lot of more contrasty areas within the photograph. So anywhere where a lot of sun is being reflected off, that's where you get some of these almost black, completely black tones. And so, you know, I thought this photograph was particularly interesting just because there's a lot more textures, there's a lot more detail, particularly in the shadows, and you know, it's also just a really unique little pocket in the city of Chicago. So yeah, all in all, I was pretty happy with the photograph. All things considered, being a expired roll of film and having taken this through, you know, a pretty old camera that hasn't really gotten serviced in, I would assume, at least 20 to 30 years. It is actually a decent exposure, and I'm fairly happy with it. This is another photograph taken on the same block. Again, there's definitely a lot. There's a much wider area of features and just different areas in the photograph that are brought out by the highlights and brought out by, you know, a lot of natural sunlight that's shining on the brick surfaces of all these buildings. So it's definitely more of a focus on the highlights in this photograph as compared to this one, which there's definitely a lot more darker tones here. There's definitely a much greater emphasis on the shadows, where here I wanted to bring out a little bit more of the highlights. So I think for this one I did expose one stop slower. So as opposed to maybe 1/200th of a second. I probably exposed this one at 1/160th or 1/100th. But yeah, all in all, not too much to say about this photograph either. Again, you know, the big thing here is the weather conditions and the lighting conditions were much better in comparison to what we see in this photograph, which obviously being a more overcast day, there's just not as much detail that's captured in the shadows as compared to this photograph here. But yeah, all in all, again, it helps to photograph a very picturesque street with a lot of really nice houses. But yeah, all in all, pretty happy with that photograph. Now this one, on the other hand, of all the scans that I got back, this was probably this by far was my favorite photograph, and this one I also did share on my Instagram page. So be sure to follow my Instagram if you're not already. So this is a photograph of the Music Box Theater. So this wasn't in my exact neighborhood. However, this was right on the Southport corridor, which was about 2.5 miles from my apartment. And this is a very well-known music theater on the north side of Chicago. And the thing that I like about this photograph is I think of all the scans that I got back, I think this one does the best job of really kind of showing off the different tones and tonality and just the different contrasty effects that this stock of Ilford film can really bring out. So as you can see, again, this was another, it was partly cloudy, but this was definitely a very sunny, warm day that I snapped this photo on. So you could tell that there's a lot of different things going on here. So you have the highlights here, which in this photograph they're almost blown out a little bit, which is surprising because I definitely remember metering for I probably metered more so for the highlights in this picture, and then maybe exposed half a stop further for the shadows in this photograph. So in terms of the overall thought process behind the exposure in this photograph, you know, there wasn't any like crazy forethought that went into this. But as you can see, there's, you know, we have some really dark shadows going on down here. Obviously, I didn't expose for that section of the photograph. I wanted kind of the marquee up here to be sort of the main focus, as well as the facade of the building. But all in all, I mean, again, given the lighting conditions, there's a lot of detail, a lot of texture that's recovered, particularly in, you know, some of the brick and some of the stonework of the buildings as well. The thing that kind of surprises me is that the sky isn't as it's not as dark as I expected it to be, even for this particular kind of film stock. I would expect, if say this photograph was taken on color negative film like Portra or even, you know, Fuji Pro 400H, I would expect the highlights to be blown out a little bit given the exposure. However, for infrared types of film, especially in comparison to, you know, some of the photographs that you see here, where, you know, some of those really blue skies almost have this sort of like, almost has this sort of like blackness to it, and you're just not getting that kind of effect in this scan here. And maybe it's the scan, maybe it's the photograph itself. It's hard to say exactly what's causing that. But all in all, I was really happy with this photograph. And of course, you know, being one of my favorite parts of my old neighborhood, you know, I really enjoyed getting the opportunity to just kind of walk around, snap some pictures, and just have fun. And you know, that's what this is really all about. All right, and this photograph, this was taken pretty close to Lakeview. I believe this is just like an outdoor patio at a bar in the neighborhood. Not really a lot to comment on here, you know, just kind of walking around, snapping some photos. I think what's interesting to see here is No, actually, you know what? Scratch that. There's really not that much interesting going on here. The fact that the sky is as blown out as it is tells me that I probably overexposed a little bit too much. I think going back, because I took this picture summer of 2020, because I was still I had moved out of Chicago by the time 2021 came around, so I likely overexposed this photograph, probably for you know, for the highlights here, because I was trying to emphasize, you know, trying to create a more contrasty effect with the shadows by exposing for the highlights here for whatever reason. Yet, in spite of that, the sky is still almost white in this photograph. So a little surprising there, but an interesting effect, to say the least. This was probably my other favorite photograph, and again, given that this was a very bright, very sunny, it was a very hot day as well, if I recall correctly. And so this is right in my old neighborhood of Buena Park, and at the time, there was actually a mural display that was going up really close to a liquor store that was essentially a couple blocks away from my old apartment building. And yeah, just walking around, the artist was doing his thing, and I decided to take a picture of it. And I think that this photograph by far is the sharpest and the best exposure overall. I actually really like this photograph. I think if I were to move back to Buena Park, I would definitely consider getting a print of this. I do think that this picture turned out really, really well. I'm glad I nailed the exposure on this one, especially considering that, you know, whenever you're exposing for really bright whites, because the entire wall in this picture was painted white, and most of these letters were like a dark green. Obviously they look black in this photo because it's a black and white picture, but most of these outlines, like some of these outlines I believe are black, but the lettering here is green for the most part. So yeah, really happy with how this picture turned out. I think, you know, this being my first time having worked and photographed on black and white film, you know, I was just really eager to photograph and capture a number of different scenes and just different buildings, people, subjects, and just really kind of get a feel for not only what black and white film is like to shoot with, but this particular type of Ilford film stock, which, you know, I will say was a good experience. You know, I'm definitely looking forward to trying some other film stocks as well, but all in all, really happy with how that photo turned out. Yeah, and that is actually it. I don't really have any other too much other commentary on Ilford SFX as a film stock in general, but I will say it was an interesting experience. I'm actually in the process of getting a roll of Ilford HP5 developed. I was actually at a friend's birthday party 2 months ago, and you know, brought my little Contax point and shoot camera there. Took some photos with friends of the event, of the party, again, just to, you know, again, have some fun. And this was also my first time shooting Ilford HP5, so I'm excited to see how those results come out. So stay tuned for that video, because that video will be coming hopefully in the next couple of weeks. Overall, if you guys liked the video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment in the comment section below, hit that subscribe button. Also, don't forget to hit that little bell so you get notified every single time I post a video, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.